Okay, another structure you see behind me here that Washington used during the encampment. This is called a wigwam. Now, most likely, when their army was on the march, they didn't have their tents. Sometimes they left their material behind. They left their tents behind to lighten their load. Now, soldiers on both sides, the British and the American side, would take fence rails. Now, this was very common in Chester County in this area. A lot of the farmers' fields were marked off. They had a lot of fence rails. So when they encamped in the area, they took the farmers' fence rails and they would stack them up to resemble a wigwam or a teepee. Now, generally, the farmers didn't like this. They didn't like their fences being taken. But the army at that time had no problem about taking fences down and making structures out of them. Generally, some of the huts that you see were most likely made with farmers' fence rails. Now, the wigwams would have been used, the Battle of Paoli. Now, when Anthony Wayne's division was left behind and Washington was headed to Reading, what happened was they left their tents. Washington took the tents with them to lighten Anthony Wayne's load. So when they were in the Paoli battlefield, this is what they would have had. They had to make structures like this to house themselves. Now, this one is a little different. It's really not water resistant. Most of these wigwams were meant to be used for a day, possibly a day and a half, no more longer. But they did keep the soldiers from the wind blowing on them. And basically, these structures were very easy to assemble. They went out, they took farmers' rails, and they would stack them, usually on an angle, a 45-degree angle, and then they would throw branches over it to make it somewhat water resistant. Now, I'm sure that these were used during the encampment here at Valley Forge. I would assume that most of the tents at that time, there wasn't very many. When they arrived here in 1777 on December 19th, like I was saying, they had tents. They didn't have these structures right away. They had to make these. It took a little while. Now, they had about 1,000 of these huts. These huts would have been everywhere that you see today. You only see a small number on the not the battlefield, but the park today. Now, this whole area would have been a quagmire of mud. There would have been people moving around like beavers. There would have been wagons. There'd be provisions coming into town. There'll be locals. There'd be Quakers. Everybody would be in this general area, making sure that everybody was, fitting well. Now, there's a lot of stories about Valley Forge, how they did march here in the snow. That is absolutely true. There are many accounts of them coming here in the snow. And it's absolutely true that they didn't have proper clothing. Now, after the Philadelphia campaign, a lot of these Continentals were tired. They fought 3 battles, from Battle of Brandywine, they went to Paoli, they fought at Germantown. They didn't have clothes. Their clothes were raggedy. They were taggly guys. They were tired. When they arrived in the camp, I'm sure that, the stories that you hear about their feet being exposed is absolutely true. When these guys were fighting, they went through briar bushes. They didn't have proper stockings. The stockings would rip off as they would run through the woods. Now, when they arrived here, their shoes were basically what you think. Their shoes were like dress shoes. They had buckles on them. They're not made for campaign. Most of these guys came from outside the area. They were generally very poorly clothed. They had what they had from home. They didn't have Continental uniforms, as you think. So when they stayed in the area, the tents were provided. They put these tents up. Now, Washington was smart. He didn't want to go into his permanent headquarters. What he wanted to do is he wanted to, show a seniority with the troops. So he stayed in the tent until December 25th. He stayed over there at Anthony Wayne's Woods. He stayed in that general area. And basically, he stayed with his men. He stayed in the tent. He was cold. His aides de camp were with him at the time. But I just wanted to show you that these are some of the structures that would have been made when they first arrived here in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania.